They say money screams, but wealth whispers. At Jessica and Caleb's wedding of the century at the Pierre in New York, the screams were loud. Everyone looked at Sienna like she was trash, a stain on their perfect, diamond-encrusted evening. They mocked her cheap dress, seated her by the kitchen, and laughed when wine was accidentally spilled on her lap. They thought she was nobody, just a poor, distant cousin invited out of pity. But they didn't know who was landing on the roof in a private Sikorsky helicopter at that very moment. They didn't know that the man who owned their debt, their careers, and this entire hotel was coming for his wife. The invitation had felt heavy in Sienna's hands when it arrived 3 months ago. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf lettering that probably cost more than her entire monthly grocery budget. The wedding of Jessica Van Doren and Caleb Montgomery, the Pierre Hotel, New York City. Black tie strictly enforced. Sienna hadn't wanted to come. She really hadn't. But Caleb was her cousin, the only family she had left on her father's side. They used to be close when they were kids, running through the sprinklers in their grandmother's backyard in Ohio, long before Caleb moved to the city, landed a job at a hedge fund, and met Jessica. Jessica, whose father was a minor politician, and whose mother, Patricia, acted as if she were royalty in exile. Sienna adjusted the strap of her dress as she stepped out of the yellow taxi. It wasn't a designer gown. It was a simple, navy blue slip dress she'd found on sale at Macy's for $80. It fit her slender frame well, but against the sea of Vera Wang, Oscar de la Renta, and custom Givenchy flowing up the stairs of the Pierre, she felt painfully underdressed. "Name?" the security guard at the entrance asked, holding a clipboard. He didn't look her in the eye. He was too busy scanning the crowd for paparazzi. "Sienna Montgomery," she said softly. The guard ran his finger down the list. He frowned. Then he flipped the page. Montgomery. Here. You're not on the main guest list. You're on the supplementary list." Sienna felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. "Supplementary?" "Yeah. Wait over there." He jerked his head toward a side roped-off area where the florists and band members were loading in equipment. "We have to clear the VIPs first." "But I'm the groom's cousin," Sienna protested, her voice tightening. "And I'm the Queen of England," the guard muttered, turning his back on her to open the velvet rope for a woman stepping out of a Bentley. Sienna swallowed her pride and moved to the side. She stood there for 20 minutes, shivering slightly in the crisp October air, watching guests who were likely strangers to the couple breeze past security. It wasn't until the crowd thinned that the guard finally waved her through with a dismissive hand. Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over tables laden with white roses and orchids. A string quartet played Debussy in the corner. It smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Sienna tried to make herself invisible. She scanned the room for a friendly face, but she saw no one. Caleb was nowhere to be found, likely prepping for the ceremony. "Oh, look, the charity case actually showed up." The voice was shrill and unmistakable. Sienna froze. She turned to see Patricia, the mother of the bride, standing with a group of women who looked like they shared the same plastic surgeon. Patricia was wearing a silver dress that looked like chainmail, and her eyes were cold enough to freeze water. "Hello, Patricia," Sienna said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The venue is beautiful." Patricia looked Sienna up and down, her lip curling in distaste. "It's Vera Wang and Preston Bailey design. Not that you would know the difference, dear. Is that polyester?" The women around her tittered, covering their mouths with manicured hands. "It's a blend," Sienna said, lifting her chin. "Where is Caleb? I'd like to wish him luck." Caleb is busy with important people, Patricia snapped. People who actually contributed to the registry. Speaking of which, did you bring a gift? Or is your presence the gift? Sienna clutched her small clutch bag tighter. Inside was a check for $200, a stretch for her right now, considering she had just moved apartments. I left a card at the table. How quaint, Patricia said, turning away. Well, try not to get in the way of the photographers. We have an exclusive deal with Vogue, and they strictly asked for a specific aesthetic. You understand? Sienna understood perfectly. She was unwanted. She was the dirt on their shoe. She retreated to the back of the room, finding her assigned table. Table 28. She walked past table 1, where the bridal party sat. Past table 5, reserved for senators and CEOs. Past table 10, where Caleb's college friends were laughing. She kept walking until she reached the very back of the ballroom, right next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Table 28 wasn't even a full round table. It was a small bistro table, shoved into the corner, dangerously close to where the waiters were stacking dirty dishes. There were only 2 other people at the table, an elderly woman who looked like she had fallen asleep, and a teenage boy playing games on his phone with the volume up. Sienna sat down, her back to the wall. The vibration of the kitchen staff shouting orders buzzed against her chair. Just get through the ceremony, eat the dinner, and leave, she told herself. Do it for Caleb. But as she reached for a glass of water, she noticed something. There was no name card for her, just a generic card that read, Guest. She wasn't even Sienna Montgomery to them. She was just a placeholder. Suddenly, a commotion near the entrance drew the room's attention. The music stopped. The double doors opened, and Jessica walked in, not for the ceremony, but for a pre-reception entrance. She looked stunning, admittedly, in a dress that probably cost more than a house, but her face was twisted in anger as she whispered furiously to a terrified-looking wedding planner. Then, Jessica's eyes scanned the room and landed on Sienna in the corner. The anger on the bride's face melted into a cruel smirk. She whispered something to her maid of honor, a girl named Courtney, who had been mean to Sienna since the rehearsal dinner. Courtney giggled, grabbed 2 glasses of red wine from a passing tray, and began walking straight toward table 28. Sienna's stomach dropped. She knew that walk. She knew that look. Courtney arrived at the table, feigning a stumble. Oops! The red wine didn't just spill, it was launched. A dark crimson wave splashed directly onto Sienna's chest, soaking the blue dress, dripping down onto her lap, and splashing onto her face. The ballroom went silent. Then, a few giggles broke out. Then, full-blown laughter. "Oh my God!" Courtney cried, her hand over her mouth, her eyes dancing with malice. "I am so clumsy. I didn't even see you there, sitting so far back in the dark." Sienna stood up, gasping as the cold wine soaked into her skin. She wiped wine from her cheek. She looked toward the head table. Caleb was there now. He saw it happen. He looked at Sienna. Then he looked at Jessica, who was suppressing a smile. Caleb looked down at his shoes and said nothing. That hurt more than the wine. The betrayal of silence. "It's fine," Sienna said, her voice shaking. I'll go clean up." "Maybe you should just go," Patricia called out from a nearby table, not bothering to lower her voice. "You're ruining the color scheme, dear." Sienna grabbed her purse. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and angry. She turned to rush toward the restroom, head down, humiliated. She didn't notice the tall man in the black tuxedo entering the room from the terrace doors. He wasn't part of the wedding party. He was wearing an earpiece, and he looked like he could snap a steel bar in half. He held up a hand, stopping Sienna gently. "Mom," the security agent said, "please let me go. Sienna choked out. "I can't do that, Mum," the agent said, his voice low and respectful. "He's 5 minutes out. He wants you waiting." Sienna froze. She looked at the agent, confused. "What?" "The boss," the agent said. "He just landed." The music in the ballroom had resumed, a desperate attempt by the band to cover the awkwardness of the wine accident. Guests returned to their chatter, dismissing Sienna as nothing more than a momentary diversion. Sienna stared at the security agent. He was massive, with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a demeanor that screamed special forces. "I don't know who you're talking about," Sienna whispered, wiping a droplet of wine from her chin. "I just need to leave." "Mr. Sterling gave specific instructions," the man said, blocking her path to the exit. "He said if anyone upset you, I was to hold the perimeter until he arrived." At the mention of the name Sterling, the air left Sienna's lungs. Alexander. She hadn't told him she was coming here. She had specifically told him she was going to a spa weekend in Connecticut. She didn't want him involved. She didn't want his world colliding with this petty, small-minded family drama. She wanted to handle Caleb's wedding on her own terms, as Sienna the cousin, not Sienna the... whatever she was to the world now. "How did he know?" she hissed. The guard tapped his earpiece. "He tracks the black card, Mum. You used it to pay for the taxi." Sienna groaned. Of course. The one time she used the emergency card Alexander had forced into her wallet, he tracked it. "Is there a problem here?" It was Caleb. He had finally walked over, looking flushed and anxious. He ignored the massive security guard and looked at Sienna with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Sienna, look. Maybe it is best if you go change, or just head home. Jessica is really upset. She thinks the wine stain is going to be a distraction in the photos." Sienna looked at her cousin, really looked at him. The boy who used to share his ice cream with her was gone. In his place was a weak man terrified of his wife. "A distraction?" Sienna repeated incredulously. "Caleb, her maid of honor, threw wine on me." "It was an accident," Caleb lied, his eyes shifting away. "Look, I'll pay for the dry cleaning. Just go, okay? Please, don't make a scene." "She isn't going anywhere," the security guard rumbled. His voice was deep enough to vibrate in Caleb's chest. Caleb looked at the guard, finally noticing him. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "Security is provided by the hotel. I didn't hire you." "No," the guard said calmly. "You couldn't afford me." Suddenly, the glass doors to the terrace, the ones overlooking Central Park, burst open. A gust of wind swept into the room, carrying the distinct, rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades spinning down nearby. The room fell silent again. The terrace at the pier was not a landing pad. It was impossible to land there unless you had clearance from the FAA, the NYPD, and the mayor himself. 2 more men in black suits entered first, scanning the room with professional detachment. Then he walked in. Alexander Sterling. He was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders like a second skin. He didn't just walk, he stalked. He possessed a kind of lethal elegance that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Alexander was the CEO of Sterling Global, a private equity firm that quietly owned half the city's infrastructure. He was 34, devastatingly handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, and known in the business world as the Shark of Wall Street. He was also the man Sienna had secretly married in a courthouse in Greenwich 6 months ago. A collective gasp rippled through the room. People recognized him. Of course they did. He was on the cover of Forbes last month. "Is that Alexander Sterling?" someone whispered. "What is he doing here? Does Caleb know him? I heard he's looking to buy the hotel chain." Patricia, the mother of the bride, practically sprinted across the dance floor, her chainmail dress jangling. She shoved her way in front of Caleb. "Mr. Sterling," she gushed, her voice dropping an octave into a sultry purr. "Oh my goodness, we had no idea you were coming. Caleb didn't tell us he had such distinguished friends. Please, please, come in. We can rearrange the head table immediately." She motioned frantically to the waiters. "Get champagne, the vintage Dom Perignon. Now!" Alexander didn't even look at her. His cold grey eyes were scanning the room. He looked past the crystal chandeliers, past the terrified waiters, past the trembling Caleb. His eyes landed on Sienna. His expression, usually stone cold, darkened instantly when he saw the red wine soaked into her dress and the shimmer of tears in her eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He walked past Patricia as if she were a ghost. He walked straight to Sienna. "Sienna," he said, his voice low but carrying across the silent room. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing the wine stain on her collarbone. "Are you hurt?" Sienna shook her head, unable to speak. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Who did this?" Alexander asked. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The quiet menace in his tone was far more terrifying. "Mr. Sterling," Patricia interrupted, laughing nervously as she trotted up behind him. "I think there's been a mistake. That's just Sienna. She's nobody. A distant relative. We were just asking her to leave because she's made a mess of herself. If you'll come this way, we have a seat next to the bride." Alexander turned slowly to face Patricia. He looked at her with the kind of boredom a lion shows a mouse before crushing it. "Nobody," Alexander repeated. He reached out and took Sienna's hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving Patricia's face. "This nobody," Alexander said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "is my wife." The silence that followed was deafening. A waiter dropped a tray of glasses, the crash echoing like a gunshot, but no one moved. "Wife?" Caleb stammered, his face draining of color. "Sienna, you're married to Alexander Sterling." "Mrs. Sienna Sterling," Alexander corrected, his eyes narrowing at Caleb. "And I'm curious, Caleb, is this how your family treats my family?" Jessica, the bride, had marched over, unwilling to let the spotlight shift. "This is ridiculous. She's lying. She's a waitress or a secretary. She can't be your wife. Look at her dress. It's cheap." Alexander finally looked at the bride. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That dress," Alexander said smoothly, "is worn by the woman who owns the holding company that holds the mortgage on your father's estate, Jessica, and the loan on this wedding." He turned to his head of security. "Grant, get the car, and call the acquisitions department. I want to audit the Van Doren accounts. Tonight." "Yes, sir," the guard replied. "Wait!" Patricia shrieked, realizing the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Sterling, please. It was just a misunderstanding. Just a little wine spill. A joke." "A joke," Alexander mused. He looked at the table where Courtney, the maid of honor, was trying to hide behind a centerpiece. Was it? He let go of Sienna's hand for a moment and walked over to the nearest table. He picked up a magnum of red wine, an expensive vintage meant for the toast. He walked over to Courtney. She trembled, her eyes wide. "You like jokes?" Alexander asked. He tilted the bottle. He didn't splash it. He poured it, slowly, deliberately, over Courtney's impeccably styled hair and pale pink bridesmaid dress. The wine glugged out, thick and dark, ruining the silk, ruining the makeup, ruining the night. Courtney gasped but didn't dare move. "Oops," Alexander said, deadpan. "I seem to be clumsy." He placed the empty bottle on the table with a thud. He turned back to Sienna, his expression softening instantly. He took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering the stained blue dress with his warmth and scent. "Let's go, darling," he said. "I'm craving Italian, and this place has suddenly lost its appetite." "Alexander," Sienna whispered, looking at Caleb. Caleb looked devastated. "What about the wedding?" "What wedding?" Alexander asked, guiding her toward the exit. "As far as I'm concerned, the party is over." As they walked toward the doors, Patricia chased after them. "You can't do this. We paid a deposit. You can't just leave and, wait, audit the accounts. What does that mean, Mr. Sterling?" Alexander stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. "It means," he said over his shoulder, "that by tomorrow morning, Sienna will decide if you still have a house to live in. I'd be very nice to her if I were you." He swept Sienna out the door into the waiting night, where a line of black SUVs had already pulled up to the curb. But the drama was far from over. Because as the doors closed behind them, leaving a ruined wedding in their wake, Sienna knew one thing. Her secret was out. And the wolves wouldn't stop coming. They would just change their tactics. The interior of the Maybach GLR 600 was a sanctuary of silence and hand-stitched cream leather, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene they had just left behind at the pier. The windows were tinted so darkly that the flashing lights of New York City passed by like distant, muted streaks of neon. Sienna sat trembling slightly, still clutching Alexander's tuxedo jacket around her shoulders. The scent of him, sandalwood, expensive scotch, and crisp winter air enveloped her, grounding her racing heart. Alexander didn't speak immediately. He opened a compartment between the seats, revealing a crystal decanter of amber liquid. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a heavy glass and offered it to her. "Drink," he said softly. "It will steady your nerves." Sienna took the glass. Her hands were shaking so much the ice clinked against the crystal. She took a sip. The burn was immediate and welcome. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered, staring into the amber liquid. "You humiliated them." Alexander loosened his bow tie, undoing the top button of his shirt. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "They humiliated you. I simply balanced the ledger. In my world, Sienna, if you let someone throw wine on you without consequence, they will throw acid next time." "But Caleb," Sienna's voice cracked. "He's my cousin. He's the only family I have." "He stood there and watched," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "He valued his wife's vanity over your dignity. That is not family, Sienna. That is a parasite, and I don't keep parasites around my wife." Sienna looked out the window. "Everyone knows now. The deal, the agreement we made. It's over." They had married 6 months ago, under unconventional circumstances. Sienna had been working as an archivist at the New York Public Library, struggling to pay off her late father's medical debts. Alexander had needed a wife, quickly, to satisfy a clause in his grandfather's trust that would allow him to take full control of Sterling Global before his 35th birthday. It was supposed to be a business arrangement, a secret marriage for 1 year. She got her debts paid, he got his company. They lived in separate wings of his massive estate in the Hamptons on weekends and ignored each other during the week. But somewhere between the late-night contract reviews and the quiet dinners in his library, the lines had blurred. Alexander had started looking at her not as a contractual obligation, but as something precious, and Sienna had fallen, hard and fast, for the lonely man behind the billions. "The secret is out," Alexander acknowledged. He reached across the console and took her hand again. His thumb traced the engagement ring she usually kept hidden on a chain around her neck, but which he had slipped onto her finger in the chaos of the exit. It was a 12-carat, flawless pink diamond, the pink star of the sterling collection. "Are you afraid?" "I'm not afraid of the world," Sienna said, looking him in the eye. "I'm afraid of what you're going to do to them. You said you'd audit the accounts." Alexander smirked, a cruel, satisfied expression. "I already have. My team has been monitoring the Van Doren family finances for weeks. I was waiting for the right time to strike. Tonight just gave me the excuse." "What did you find?" "Jessica's father, the esteemed Councilman Van Doren, has a gambling problem," Alexander said, casually, as if discussing the weather. "He's been funneling campaign funds into offshore accounts to pay debts in Macau. And Caleb, your beloved cousin, has been borrowing from his hedge fund's client accounts to fund Jessica's lifestyle." Sienna gasped. "Caleb wouldn't." "He would. And he did. He works for BlackRock, but the subsidiary he manages was acquired by Sterling Global this morning. Technically, he works for me, which means he's been stealing from me." The car slowed to a halt. They weren't at a restaurant. They were at the base of 432 Park Avenue, the pencil-thin skyscraper that dominated the Manhattan skyline. "I thought we were getting Italian," Sienna asked. "Change of plans," Alexander said, helping her out of the car as the doormen rushed to shield them with umbrellas, even though it wasn't raining. Paparazzi were already gathering at the corners, tipped off by social media. "We're ordering in. I'm not sharing you with the cameras tonight." As they entered the private elevator that opened directly into the penthouse, Sienna felt the weight of her new reality. The elevator rose 90 floors in seconds. When the doors opened, the view was staggering. All of New York City lay beneath them, a grid of golden lights. But Sienna couldn't look at the view. She was looking at the massive, flat-screen TV on the wall, which was tuned to a 24-hour news network. The headline ran in bold red letters: "Billionaire Alexander Sterling crashes wedding, reveals secret wife." A shaky cell phone video, filmed by one of the guests, was playing on a loop. It showed the moment Alexander poured the wine over Courtney. "Turn it off," Alexander commanded. The smart home system obeyed instantly. He walked over to her, pulling the stained tuxedo jacket from her shoulders. "Go shower. I've had clothes sent over from the townhouse. Tomorrow, the world is going to come knocking. I want you to be ready." Sienna walked toward the master bathroom, a space larger than her entire apartment. She paused at the door. "Alexander." "Yes?" "Did you mean it?" she asked softly. "When you told Patricia I was your family." Alexander stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his silhouette framed against the Empire State Building. He didn't turn around. "I never lie about business, Sienna," he said. "And you are the most important investment of my life." It was a cold way to say, "I love you," but coming from a man who had a heart made of ledger sheets, it was enough. The next morning, Sienna woke up to the smell of freshly brewed Blue Mountain coffee and the sound of silence. The penthouse was soundproofed, sealed off from the noise of the city. She stretched, her hand brushing against the high thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then the memories of the wedding crashed back into her mind. She sat up. On the bedside table, there was a brand-new iPhone 15 Pro Max still in the box, with a note on top in Alexander's sharp, angular handwriting. "Your old phone was blowing up. I took the liberty of getting you a new number. Only 5 people have it. Choose wisely who you give it to." Sienna opened the phone. It was already set up. There were 3 contacts saved: Alexander, Grant, security, and Claire, personal assistant. She put on a silk robe that had been laid out for her and walked into the living area. Alexander was sitting at the marble dining table, wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was reading a physical copy of the Wall Street Journal while typing on a tablet with his other hand. "Good morning," he said, without looking up. "Eat. You need strength." A spread of pastries, fruit and eggs was laid out. Sienna picked up a croissant but didn't eat it. "How bad is it?" she asked. Alexander slid a tablet across the table toward her. "Define bad. If you mean publicity, you're currently the most famous woman in America. If you mean the Van Dorens, their lives are effectively over." Sienna looked at the screen. It was open to Twitter, X. The trending topics were 1. Gas Alexander Sterling. Wow, the Red Wedding 3. Nah, Sienna Sterling 4. Karma Ice a wine bottle. She clicked on a video from TMZ. The reporter was standing outside the Pierre. Sources inside the wedding say that the bride, Jessica Van Doren, had a meltdown of epic proportions after Sterling departed. The wedding was cancelled mid-reception. But that's not the biggest news. This morning, FBI agents were seen entering the offices of Councilman Van Doren, seizing hard drives. Is this the Sterling effect? We reached out to Sterling Global for comment. Sienna put the tablet down. "The FBI? Alexander, you called the FBI?" "I didn't have to," Alexander said, finally taking a sip of his coffee. "I just released the audit report to the SEC. They did the rest. Transparency is key in the market, darling." "And Caleb?" "Caleb has been trying to reach you. He's called the main switchboard of my office 50 times since 6 a.m. He's in the lobby downstairs." Sienna froze. "He's here?" Grant stopped him at the front desk. "He's crying, apparently. It's quite a scene. Do you want to see him?" Sienna hesitated. Part of her wanted to never see him again, but the other part needed closure. She needed to know why he had betrayed her. "Yes," she said. "I want to see him." Alexander nodded. He tapped his earpiece. "Grant, send him up, but check him for recording devices first. And Grant, if he raises his voice, break his arm." "Alexander!" Sienna scolded. "Figure of speech," Alexander said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Caleb stumbled in. He looked like a wreck. His tuxedo from the night before was rumpled, his tie missing, his eyes red and swollen. He saw Sienna standing by the window, looking like a queen in her silk robe, the skyline behind her. He stopped. "Sienna," he croaked. "Hello, Caleb," she said, her voice steady. She didn't move toward him. "Sienna, please, you have to talk to him," Caleb begged, gesturing frantically toward Alexander, who was calmly buttering a piece of toast. "He fired me. He fired my whole team, and he's pressing charges for embezzlement. They're going to put me in jail." "Did you steal the money?" Sienna asked. "It was just a loan," Caleb cried. "Jessica wanted the honeymoon in the Maldives. She wanted the apartment on the Upper East Side. I was going to pay it back." "You stole from client accounts," Alexander cut in, his voice slicing through the air. "That's a federal crime, Caleb. Minimum 10 years. "Sienna, we're family." Caleb dropped to his knees. It was pathetic. "Our dads were brothers. You can't let him do this to me. Jessica, she left me. She took her things and went to her mother's house this morning. I have nothing." Sienna looked at her cousin, the man who had let her be humiliated because he was afraid of his wife. "You had a choice last night, Caleb," Sienna said quietly. "When Courtney threw that wine, when Patricia called me nobody, you had a choice to stand up for me. You didn't. I was scared." "So was I," Sienna said. "I was scared and alone in a room full of people who hated me, and you let them laugh." She walked over to Alexander and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a clear signal. "I stand with him." I won't ask him to drop the charges, Sienna said. Caleb's face went white. But, Sienna continued, looking at Alexander, maybe we don't need to ruin him completely. Prison is extreme. Alexander looked up at her, studying her face. He sighed. You are too soft, Sienna. It will be your downfall. He turned to Caleb. You have two options. Option A. The FBI comes up here in 5 minutes, and you go to federal prison. Option B. You sign a confession, agree to liquidate all your assets, the apartment, the car, everything, to pay back the stolen funds. And then you leave New York, forever. Leave New York? Caleb whispered. I have a mining operation in Alaska, Alexander said. They need an administrative assistant. The pay is minimum wage. The cabin is drafty. But it's not a jail cell. Take it or leave it. Caleb looked at Sienna. She didn't look away. I'll take it, Caleb whispered, head bowing in defeat. Good, Alexander said. Grant will escort you to the legal department. Get him out of my sight. As the elevator doors closed on a broken Caleb, Sienna let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She slumped onto the sofa. Are you okay? Alexander asked, moving to sit beside her. No, she said, but I will be. Suddenly, Alexander's phone rang, a harsh, urgent tone. He frowned. Only a few people had that direct line. He answered it. Sterling. Sienna watched his face. It went from calm to stone cold in a second. His jaw clenched. When? Alexander asked. Who authorized it? He listened for another moment, then hung up. He stood up, buttoning his cuffs. The energy in the room shifted from domestic to predatory. What is it? Sienna asked, alarmed. We have a problem, Alexander said. It seems the video of the wedding reached Europe. So, Alexander said, grabbing his suit jacket. My ex-fiancée, Genevieve St. Clair, just landed at JFK. And she's not just my ex. She's the majority shareholder of the media conglomerate that owns the network currently broadcasting our lives. Sienna felt a cold knot in her stomach. Genevieve St. Clair. The name was synonymous with old European money and ruthless fashion empires. Why is she here? Alexander turned to Sienna, his eyes serious. Because before I married you, there was a contract between the Sterling and St. Clair families. A merger. She thinks you're the only thing standing in the way of a billion-dollar deal. He walked to the door. Get dressed, Sienna. Real clothes. Armor. We're going to war. War? Genevieve just called a press conference, Alexander said grimly. She claims our marriage is a fraud, and she has photos of the contract we signed 6 months ago. Sienna's blood ran cold. If the world knew their marriage was just a business deal, the board of directors could oust Alexander, and she would be branded a gold digger on a global scale. The wedding drama was child's play. The real game had just begun. Put this on. Alexander tossed a garment bag onto the bed. It landed with a heavy, expensive rustle. Sienna stared at it, her heart still pounding from the news of Genevieve St. Clair's arrival. What is it? Armor, Alexander repeated, buttoning his cufflinks in the mirror. His face was a mask of cold, calculated fury. Genevieve is going to play the victim. She will wear white or pastel. She will cry. She will try to look like the scorned saint and paint you as the usurper. You need to look like the woman who owns the building she's standing in. Sienna unzipped the bag. Inside was a dress that looked less like clothing and more like a weapon. It was a structured, blood-red Alexander McQueen power suit with a plunging neckline and sharp, architectural shoulders. It was bold, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. I can't wear this, Sienna whispered. I'm a librarian, Alexander, not a corporate shark. Alexander stopped, or he walked over to her, gripping her shoulders. He looked down at her, his grey eyes searching hers. You are not a librarian anymore, Sienna. You are Sienna Sterling. You stared down your family last night. You sent your cousin to Alaska. You have steel in you. Find it. He lowered his voice. Genevieve has a copy of the pre-nup draft, the one that explicitly states the marriage expires in 12 months in exchange for debt forgiveness. If she shows that to the press, the stock tanks, the board votes me out, and we lose everything. She has the draft? Sienna paled. How? We'll find the leak later. Right now, we have to control the narrative. Get dressed. 30 minutes later, the elevator doors of the Sterling Global Headquarters opened. The lobby was a zoo. Reporters from CNN, BBC, and Fox Business were crammed behind velvet ropes. Flashbulbs went off like strobe lights as Alexander and Sienna stepped out. And there, standing on a makeshift podium in the center of the lobby, was Genevieve St. Clair. She was beautiful in a terrifying way. Blonde, statuesque, and wearing a pale blue cashmere coat that made her look fragile and sympathetic. She was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I just want the truth, Genevieve was saying into a cluster of microphones, her French accent thick and charming. Alexander and I, we had an understanding, a merger of our families. And then, suddenly, he marries this mystery woman. I have reason to believe he was coerced, or worse, that he is defrauding the shareholders with a fake marriage to secure his trust fund. The crowd murmured. The accusation of fraud was serious. Here, Genevieve said, holding up a manila folder. I have documents, proof that this romance is nothing but a transaction. That's enough, Genevieve. Alexander's voice cut through the noise like a whip. The crowd parted as he walked toward the podium, Sienna at his side. He didn't let go of her hand. His grip was bruisingly tight. Genevieve looked up. Her eyes narrowed, but her smile remained sweet. Alexander. Finally. And this must be. The employee. She looked at Sienna with pure condescension. She didn't see a rival. She saw a bug. This is my wife, Alexander said, stepping onto the platform. He towered over Genevieve. And you are trespassing. Trespassing? Genevieve laughed lightly. I am a major shareholder, darling, and I am protecting my investment. Show them the contract, Alexander. Show them the clause about the 1-year expiration date. She opened the folder and pulled out a photocopy of a document. She held it up for the cameras. Item 4, Section B, Genevieve read aloud. The marriage shall be dissolved after 365 days, upon which Miss Montgomery will receive a sum of... The cameras zoomed in. The reporters started shouting questions. Mr. Sterling, is it true? Is the marriage a sham? Did you lie to the board? Alexander's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, to invoke legal privilege, but Sienna squeezed his hand. She stepped forward. She was trembling, but the red suit did its job. It made her stand tall. She looked at the sea of cameras, then at Genevieve's smug, perfect face. She thought of Caleb, of Patricia, of everyone who had ever treated her like she was disposable. She reached out and took the microphone from the stand. It's true, Sienna said. The room went dead silent. Alexander whipped his head toward her, his eyes wide with shock. Genevieve looked delighted. Sienna, Alexander warned, a low rumble in his chest. It is true, Sienna continued, her voice gaining strength. That contract exists. Alexander wrote it 6 months ago. She turned to face Genevieve. Because 6 months ago, Alexander Sterling was a man who didn't believe in love. He was a man who thought everything in life was a transaction. He thought he could buy a wife the way he buys companies. She looked out at the reporters. He hired me. Yes, I was poor. I was drowning in debt. I took the deal. Genevieve smirked. There you have it. Fraud. But, Sienna cut her off, her voice sharp. That was 6 months ago. Contracts are paper. People change. Sienna reached into her small clutch bag. Her hand shook as she pulled out a lighter, a silver Zippo Alexander had left on the dresser that morning. Alexander isn't the man who wrote that contract anymore, Sienna said, and I'm not the woman who signed it. She looked at Alexander. Are we a transaction, Alexander? Or are we real? It was a gamble, a massive, terrifying gamble. She was asking him to publicly declare his feelings, something he had never done, not even in private. Alexander stared at her. He looked at the lighter in her hand. He looked at the red dress. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a smile the cameras had never seen. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a folded document. The original contract. Genevieve has a copy, Alexander said to the room. I have the original. He held it out to Sienna. Sienna flicked the lighter. The flame danced. She touched it to the corner of the document. The paper caught fire. The crowd gasped. The heavy legal bond paper curled and blackened. The words, Item 4, Section B, turning to ash and floating down to the marble floor. There is no contract, Alexander announced, his voice booming. There is only my wife, and if anyone questions the legitimacy of this marriage again, they will answer to me. He pulled Sienna into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't a stage kiss. It was deep, possessive, and searing. It was a kiss that told the world, and Genevieve, that he would burn the city down for her. The reporters went wild. Genevieve stood there, her mouth open, holding her useless photocopy. She had played a corporate card in a romance game, and she had lost. The car ride back to the penthouse was different. The silence wasn't tense, it was electric. Sienna watched the city blur by. She felt exhausted, drained of adrenaline. She had just publicly admitted to a contract marriage and burned the evidence on live TV. You took a risk, Alexander said. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at her. I trusted you, Sienna said. You shouldn't have, Alexander replied darkly. I'm a ruthless man, Sienna. I could have denied it. I could have thrown you to the wolves to save the stock price. But you didn't. No, he admitted. I didn't. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Because you were right. I'm not that man anymore. The car pulled into the underground garage, but instead of going up to the penthouse, the driver took them to a different entrance, the service entrance of the Sterling building. Where are we going? Sienna asked. Loose ends, Alexander said. Genevieve didn't get that contract copy by magic. It was stored in a biometric safe in my legal counsel's office. Only 3 people have access. Me, my lead attorney, Marcus, and my personal assistant. Sienna's eyes widened. Claire? But she's so nice. She helped me pick out flowers for the apartment. Nice as a mask, Alexander said coldly. We're going to find out who paid her. They entered a small, windowless conference room in the basement. Grant, the head of security, was already there. Sitting in a chair, looking terrified and small, was Claire. She was crying. Mr. Sterling, please, Claire sobbed when they walked in. I didn't want to. They threatened me. Alexander sat down at the table opposite her. He didn't yell. He just folded his hands. Who is they, Claire? I can't say. Claire, Alexander said, his voice terrifyingly gentle. You just cost me a 12% dip in pre-market trading. That's about $400 million. Do you think I'm going to let you walk out of here without a name? Claire looked at Sienna, pleading with her eyes. Sienna, please, tell him. I have a sick mother. The medical bills, they offered to pay them all, just for a photo of the file. Sienna felt a pang of sympathy. She knew what it was like to be desperate for money to help a parent. That was exactly why she had signed the contract in the first place. "Alexander," Sienna said softly. Alexander held up a hand. "Don't." He looked at Claire. "Who paid you? Was it Genevieve?" "No," Claire whispered. "It wasn't Genevieve. She just bought the info later. The person who paid me, who asked for the file initially, was a man." "Who?" "He said his name was Thorne," Claire said. "Sebastian Thorne." Alexander went rigid. The colour drained from his face, leaving him paler than Sienna had ever seen him. He stood up so abruptly his chair knocked over. "Grant," Alexander barked. "Get her out of here. Give her a severance package and an NDA. If she speaks the name Thorne again, sue her into oblivion." "Yes, sir." Alexander grabbed Sienna's arm, perhaps a little too roughly, and pulled her out of the room. He was walking fast, almost running, toward the elevator. "Alexander, you're hurting me," Sienna said. "Who is Sebastian Thorne?" Alexander stopped. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to loosen his grip. He looked, terrified. Not for himself, but for her. "I thought he was dead," Alexander whispered. "I killed his company 10 years ago. I drove him into bankruptcy. He swore he would take everything I loved." He looked at Sienna, his eyes haunted. Genevieve was a distraction, Alexander realized. The wedding drama, the press conference, it was all smoke. Thorne used Genevieve to get me out in the open. To get you out in the open. What does that mean? Alexander checked his watch. "It means we are not safe here. Thorne doesn't care about money. He deals in accidents. We need to leave New York. Now. Leave, but the board meeting. Forget the board," Alexander shouted, the veneer of calm finally cracking. "Sienna, don't you understand? If Thorne is back, he's not coming for my money. He's coming for my wife." As if on cue, the lights in the hallway flickered and died. The emergency red lighting bathed the corridor in a blood-colored glow. The electronic lock on the elevator door beeped, signaling a system override. The elevator wasn't coming down. It was stopped, and the stairwell door at the end of the hall creaked open. Alexander pushed Sienna behind him. He reached under his jacket, not for a pen, but for a sleek, black handgun she hadn't known he carried. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Slow, deliberate, clapping. "Bravo, Alexander," a voice echoed from the shadows. It was a smooth, cultured voice, chillingly familiar. The press conference was touching. I almost cried. It makes what I have to do next so much more tragic. A man stepped into the red light. He was older, with silver hair and a scar running down his cheek. He held a cane, but he didn't lean on it. Sebastian Thorne. "You should have stayed buried, Sebastian," Alexander snarled, raising the weapon. "And miss the wedding?" Thorne smiled. "I heard the bride wore blue. A pity. Black would have been so much more appropriate." Thorne raised his hand, and 3 men stepped out from the shadows behind him, armed with silencers. "Run," Alexander whispered to Sienna. "When I start shooting, run to the garage." "I'm not leaving you," Sienna said, her voice trembling but firm. "This isn't a debate," Alexander roared. "No," Thorne interrupted. "It's a reunion, and I think Mrs. Sterling should stay. After all, she is the guest of honor." Thorne pointed his cane at Sienna. "Take her. Kill him." The basement hallway erupted into chaos. Alexander moved with a speed that defied his corporate suit, shoving Sienna into the alcove of a janitorial closet, just as the first bullet shattered the plaster, where her head had been a second before. "Stay down!" Alexander roared. spinning around the doorframe and firing 2 shots. One of Thorne's gunmen crumpled, but there were 2 left, plus Thorne, who was standing calmly amidst the gunfire, watching the violence with a detached curiosity. "You're slowing down, Alexander," Thorne called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. 10 years ago, you would have seen this coming. Domestic life has made you soft." Sienna huddled on the floor, the smell of bleach and gunpowder stinging her nose. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw Alexander check his magazine. He was running low. She looked around the small closet. Mops, buckets, chemicals, and a heavy red industrial fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. "You are not a victim," she told herself. Not anymore. Alexander was pinned down. Bullets chipped away at the doorframe, forcing him back. Thorne's men were advancing, their boots heavy on the floor. "Flank him!" one of them shouted. Sienna grabbed the fire extinguisher. It was heavy, cold steel. She didn't think. She just acted. "Alexander, duck!" she screamed. Alexander didn't question her. He dropped into a crouch. Sienna swung the heavy cylinder out into the hallway and squeezed the handle. A massive, blinding white cloud of chemical powder blasted into the corridor, engulfing the 2 gunmen who were creeping closer. They coughed, blinded, firing wildly into the ceiling. "Now!" Alexander yelled. He surged forward into the white fog. 2 shots rang out, controlled, precise. The gunman fell silent. The dust began to settle. Alexander stood panting, his gun trained on the only figure left standing. Sebastian Thorne. Thorne hadn't moved. He stood at the end of the hall, leaning on his cane, a small Derringer pistol now in his hand. But before he could raise it, a red laser dot appeared on his forehead. Then another on his chest. The stairwell door burst open behind Thorne. Grant, the head of security, stepped through with an assault team, their weapons trained on the old man. "Drop it," Grant ordered, his voice like grinding gravel. Thorne looked at the laser sights dancing on his chest. He looked at Alexander, then at Sienna, who was stepping out of the closet, covered in white dust, but standing tall. Thorne chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Well played, Mrs. Sterling. I didn't factor the librarian into the equation." He dropped the gun. "I suppose this is checkmate." Alexander walked up to Thorne. He didn't strike him. He simply leaned in close, his voice a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "If you ever say her name again," Alexander said, "I won't call the police. I'll handle it personally." "Get him out of here," Alexander commanded the security team. As Thorne was zip-tied and dragged away, the adrenaline finally left Sienna's body. Her knees buckled. Alexander caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her into a crushingly tight embrace. He buried his face in her neck, shaking slightly. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you." The Pierre Hotel was buzzing again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no nervous tension, no whispered insults. The banner above the stage read, "The Sterling Foundation Annual Charity Gala." Sienna stood on the balcony overlooking the ballroom, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. She was wearing a custom gold gown that shimmered like liquid light. She wasn't hiding in the corner near the kitchen anymore. She was the hostess. Nervous? Sienna turned to see Alexander. He looked more relaxed than he had a year ago. The hard lines around his eyes had softened. He slipped an arm around her waist. "A little," Sienna admitted. "It's a big crowd." "They're here for you," Alexander reminded her. "You raised $20 million for literacy programs tonight. You're the star." Sienna looked down at the crowd. At table 28, the bad table, she saw a familiar face. It was Patricia Van Doren. Patricia wasn't wearing chainmail tonight. She was wearing an off-the-rack dress, looking tired and significantly older. After the scandal and the bankruptcy, the Van Dorens had lost the estate. Patricia was now working as a real estate agent in New Jersey, trying to rebuild. She looked up and caught Sienna's eye. Patricia hesitated, then gave a small, humble nod of respect. Sienna nodded back. She felt no anger, only pity. The best revenge hadn't been destroying them, it had been outgrowing them. "I received a letter from Caleb today," Sienna said. "Oh?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. "How is Alaska?" "He says the cold is good for clarity. He's been promoted to shift supervisor at the mine. He's actually happy. He thanked you." Alexander grunted. "He needed to grow up. I just provided the environment." The music swelled. A waltz. Alexander took her empty glass and set it on a passing tray. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, offering his hand, "I believe this is our dance." "People are watching," Sienna teased. "Let them watch," Alexander said, pulling her onto the dance floor. "Let them see that the billionaire didn't save the nobody. The nobody saved him." As they spun under the crystal chandeliers, the cameras flashed, capturing the image that would grace the cover of every magazine the next day. But Sienna didn't care about the press. She only cared about the man holding her, the man who had given her a world where she didn't just belong. She ruled. She wasn't nobody. She was everything. And that is the story of how a spilled glass of wine led to the fall of an empire and the rise of a queen. It's a reminder that you should never judge someone by their table number, because you never know who's coming to pick them up in a helicopter. Sienna went from the kitchen corner to the cover of Forbes, proving that true class isn't about what you wear, but how you stand your ground. What did you think of Caleb's punishment? Was Alaska too harsh, or did he deserve prison for betraying his family? And what would you do if your ex crashed your press conference? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next dramatic story. Thanks for watching.